My name is Katie. I'll be turning 68 this year. At the end of last year, my husband, with whom I lived, passed away suddenly from cancer, and I found myself abruptly moving in with my eldest son, Dan's family. Originally, my husband and I lived in the house where Dan's family resides now, but when Dan got married and had children, we moved into a nearby affordable one-bedroom apartment, handing over the house to Dan's family. Dan started his own business, and with an unstable income and unable to secure a loan, my husband devised a plan for the sake of our grandchildren. When we handed over the house, it was beautifully renovated, feeling brand new. Over time, Dan was blessed with 3 children, and we had a good relationship, occasionally playing with our grandchildren and dining together at a nearby restaurant for birthdays. However, once my husband's cancer was discovered too late for treatment, worried about me being left alone, he called Dan and asked, "Please look after Mom when I'm gone. Live with her." I tried to reassure him, "Don't worry about me. I'm still strong and can manage on my own," but he wouldn't hear of it. Dan, unable to go against his father's dying wish, agreed to live with me. In fact, since we had moved out, I had never once been inside Dan's home. I hesitated, thinking his wife, Nina, might not welcome me. So, when I arrived, I was met with a shocking sight. I tried to minimize any inconvenience by bringing as little as possible with me to Dan's home. The original house was a small 4-bedroom, with 3 rooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. Dan came out, feigning surprise. "Oh? Was today the moving day?" Dan has always been forgetful, a trait that hasn't changed into adulthood. Entering the house, I found shoes piled up and a foul smell emanating from within. The exterior looked normal, so the inside took me by surprise. Dan, seemingly unconcerned, said, "Dad asked for this, but honestly, there's no place for you here," and turned his back to go inside. Reluctantly, I followed, removing my shoes quietly. The living and dining areas were cluttered with shopping bags and trash, leaving no place to step. It was like something out of a hoarder's house on TV, leaving me dumbfounded. Then, Nina, Dan's wife, sat up from the sofa. "There's no place for another bed, so find any spot you can. I'm too tired from work," and laid back down. She owns a beauty salon and, according to Dan, earns quite a bit. Looking up at Dan, he said, "I'm tired from work too. Just clear some space in the other room," and went upstairs. I started clearing the room, moving things into the hallway, when Nina shouted, "Hey, the stuff in the hallway is in the way." Apologizing, I moved things aside, to which she added, "It's fine to clean, but don't throw anything away without permission." Exhausted from making space, Nina then chided, "Aren't you going to help with dinner?" I'm not a maid, so I sprang into action. "Ah, is it that time already?" I lost track and hurried to the kitchen. The kitchen was a mess, but Nina was nonchalantly cooking a large amount of meat. When I offered to help, she pointed at the dishes. "Just do the dishes. I thought you'd at least order some nice food or something at times like this," she said grumpily. I paused, realizing how different our standards were, but responded with a smile. "Sorry, I should have thought of that. Let's order something tomorrow." Nina's mood improved slightly. "Yes, let's do that tomorrow." I tried to understand the mess, considering they have 3 children and she works as a salon manager. Dinner was just a lot of meat and bread, no vegetables or soup. Yet, despite the mess, Nina was particular about clothes, insisting on washing anything worn once. The family always looked well outside, so we never knew the state of their home. I began cleaning the next day, carefully sorting items that weren't obviously trash and asking Nina to confirm. With so much clutter, she often responded dismissively, "Just throw it away." I didn't want to intrude, but the state of the house was too much, especially since it was our cherished home. After a month of cleaning, the house finally started to look decent. The grandchildren joyfully played, saying, "It's like the house is on TV," and the habit of leaving half-eaten snacks around disappeared. Dan and Nina didn't particularly thank me, but I wasn't bothered as I did it out of my own volition. However, I was unaware of something. Far from appreciating my efforts, Nina was actually annoyed, saying, "What's with that, a dig? Checking up like a mother-in-law?" Nobody in the family complained or asked for it. I accidentally overheard this conversation one night when I got up to use the bathroom and found Dan and Nina having a late drink. Dan fully sided with Nina, saying, "Don't say that. If Dad hadn't told me to, I wouldn't have taken in a pensioner like her." This left me feeling gloomy, wondering where I went wrong, as I silently returned to my room, feeling pitiful surrounded by my belongings in the dimly lit space. Yet, considering my grandchildren growing up in such an unsanitary environment, I convinced myself that what I had done was right before falling asleep. Afterward, Nina started to ignore me whenever I cleaned, finding reasons to leave. Eventually, I couldn't stand the constant diet of meat and bread and asked Nina, "Would it be alright if I made some stew next time? I'm craving vegetables at my age." She hysterically slammed the dish she was washing, saying, "Do as you please. Just buy your own ingredients," turning away from me. From then on, she left the cooking to me and stopped entering the kitchen. The grandchildren, possibly due to a vitamin deficiency, eagerly ate up the fruits and vegetables, improving their skin's glow. Humans grow fond of those who feed them, and they started doting on me, asking for extras like fried potatoes on their steak. All right, I became their go-to for comfort. One day, when Nina was out late for a drinking party, a grandchild crawled into my bed to sleep, and since then, they preferred sleeping with me even when their parents were home, which probably didn't amuse Nina. She began leaving meal preparations to me. After about half a year of this routine, as summer vacation began, the family started planning a trip without involving me, making it clear I was expected to stay behind, which I found surprisingly relieving. However, my eldest grandchild suddenly insisted, "Grandma's coming with us, right?" The parents, with mixed feelings, eventually caved in due to the child's insistence, and I was included. Nina, clearly displeased, tasked me, "Since it's an early start, please prepare breakfast and lunch boxes. And finish the laundry. It's only natural since we're taking you along," so I woke up at 4 a.m. to get everything ready. The trip involved a lot of car travel, and needing frequent bathroom breaks, I often asked to stop at rest areas, causing visible irritation due to delays. The grandchild who had insisted on my coming began to rush us, leading to a scolding from Dan and tears from the child. Caught in traffic, the mood soured further, with Nina grumbling about the inconvenience despite the expense. At the amusement park, I suggested, "I'll stay at the cafe while you all have fun," distancing myself. When the kids brightened up and ran towards the rides, Nina made sure to remind me, "Make sure you pay for your own things." With no attractions suitable for the elderly and the cafe getting crowded, I felt obliged to sit outside, eventually finding myself in the park's medical center due to the harsh summer sun. I overheard the doctors reprimanding my son and daughter-in-law for neglecting me, having suffered mild heat stroke. The day's early start and the long car ride, after preparing breakfast and doing laundry, had taken its toll. Clearly annoyed, they took me back to the hotel, where they left me with a stern, "Don't cause any more trouble. We should have left you at home. We're going back to the park, just eat whatever." Alone in the quiet room, I began to wonder what I was doing with my life. The trip had been planned without considering my needs, and even after falling ill, there was no concern for my well-being. I realized I was seen as a burden, even while managing household chores. I had harbored hope for my son, whom I had raised, but that hope was misplaced. As I drifted in and out of sleep, pondering whether it was time to make a tough decision, I heard my grandchildren's voices around 6 p.m. "Grandma, are you okay?" My grandchild looks at me with concern. It seems they were worried about me and came back early from the amusement park. Behind, my parents are whispering to each other, looking unamused. Nina says, "Could you step outside for a bit? We need to talk to Grandma." Since there are playgrounds inside the hotel, my grandchild takes the younger ones outside. Then Nina starts with, "Please be reasonable. After all, isn't it a bit extravagant for a grandma to be traveling? You should just stay home and clean, you're good at that, aren't you?" The trip was supposed to be for 2 nights, and we were planning to go to the amusement park again tomorrow. On the last day, we were going to visit trick art galleries and museums, which I thought I could join in. Are you saying I should go home now, by train? To my feigned question, my eldest son, irritated, says, "What else? We took you in because it was Dad's dying wish, but don't be a freeloader on a trip." At this point, something in me snapped into clear focus. I should cut ties with them. With that resolution, I say, "Understood," and shakily stand up to pack my bags and ask the front desk to call a cab. My grandchildren notice and approach me, and I, thinking this is our last goodbye, pat their heads saying, "Grandma isn't feeling well, so I'll be heading home first. Have fun, okay?" They seem to sense something is off but can only muster a hesitant "okay, get well soon," with a smile. I give the taxi driver my home address. When the driver expresses concern about the fare, I show my platinum card and ask, "I can pay with this, right?" "Thank you," he replies, driving carefully to ensure I don't get carsick. Upon arriving home, I immediately start cleaning. My previous condo, which I had put up for rent, fortunately hadn't found a tenant yet, so I decided to move back there. The next day, I pack up my things quickly and leave my son's house, then call a real estate agent. "I'd like to sell that house." A week later, my son calls me, frantic over a disagreement with the appraiser. I visit their house and calmly announce, "I've decided to cut ties with you. So, I'm selling the house." Getting rid of unnecessary things is a part of cleaning up, after all. My son and Nina, confused, protest, "This was Dad's house, wasn't it? Shouldn't I have inherited it?" Sighing, I ask my son, "Did you ever change the house's title to your name?" "No, but I assumed it became mine." "That's not how it works. This house is in my name," I say, leaving them baffled. "What do you mean?" "So, that's how it is. And I'm cutting off the loan to your company, just so you know." "What are you talking about?" I knew my son was forgetful, but this was beyond belief. "Don't you remember? We've been loaning money to your account every month for business expenses." Dan turns pale. "That money. I thought Nina earned it." Nina, wide-eyed, confronts him. "You thought I was earning that." When Dan was short on startup capital, I agreed to lend him money, charmed by my grandchildren. To avoid inheritance taxes, I set up a private investment company for the funding. I thought I had explained it to Dan, but as it coincided with his marriage, he mistook it for Nina's income, especially since the company's name resembled Nina's salon's name. Suddenly, Dan exclaims, "Wait, there were investments after Dad died. That means it wasn't Dad's company, right?" "That's because I am the president of the company," I reveal. Dan and Nina are stunned, unable to believe the truth. "I kept silent because I didn't want to shame your father, but the assets were mine." Indeed. My spouse and I eloped against my parents' wishes, and Dan never met my grandparents. Over time, we reconciled, and I inherited their assets when they passed. It became my personal property, not part of the marital assets. Wait a minute. Wasn't it Dad who had it? As I've said time and again, your father hardly left any inheritance. It's understandable for Dan and Nina to assume it was their father's inheritance. But thinking they could inherit without any formal procedures is, frankly, a bit dim-witted, even for my own son. Dan started his business precisely because he couldn't hold down a job anywhere else. "They just don't recognize my worth," he'd declare. We didn't know how to help him, but letting him live off an inheritance didn't seem like a good idea either, so we started with a capital loan. Dan, believing it was Nina's income, recklessly spent it on living expenses and his business, while Nina's salon was floundering, with hardly any income. Yet, she too, seemed to be living carefree, counting on Dan's earnings. "I thought I would inherit this house if I just listened to Dad," Dan lamented. "And you mean this house wasn't in your name? I thought we owned it after all the renovations." Nina glared at Dan bitterly. I was so exasperated with them. "Anyway, from now on, you'll have to fend for yourselves," I said, attempting to leave when Nina grabbed my shoulder. "Katie, don't you care what happens to your adorable grandchildren?" she threatened. I replied coldly, "Parents can't be chosen. I admit I may have raised them wrong, but indulging them further won't do the grandchildren any good either, and walked away. Behind me, Dan and Nina were furiously blaming each other. "It's your fault." "Well, you too." Eventually, the house was sold, Dan's company went bankrupt due to a lack of funds, and they divorced. Both relinquished their parental rights, so I became the guardian for the grandchildren. Dan and Nina vanished, whereabouts unknown. Under proper guidance, the oldest learned to cook, the middle child took to cleaning, and the youngest learned to tidy up. They seemed to have learned that they must take care of themselves. Now, they manage household chores cooperatively without my intervention. They'll live their lives learning from their parents' mistakes. I'm glad I could pass on something valuable to my grandchildren. With chores and studies, they also care for me, making my days peaceful and content.